Fletcher Little. This is Women's History Month, and this is a remarkable American woman that I really want you to know about. So I'm gonna pass these around. I'm gonna keep one for myself so I can talk about it. I think what we'll do is send this one back that way. Nina is a remarkable woman because she made it her ambition in life to discover how Americans lived in the early days. And this was not something that was particularly interesting to people when she was a young woman. But I think first we should go back and talk about who she was, where she came from, and how she got interested in American social history. She was a child born in Brookline, Massachusetts, to a couple by the name of John and Nina Fletcher. Now he was in the textile industry in Brookline, and his father and his father's brother, his uncle, started this textile industry. They did quite well, and he married a young woman who actually had European roots. She was descended from a European count and was named for the Countess Selina. So anyway, so they were living in Brookline, and Nina was born in 1903 in February. Well, in July, as a result of Bright's disease, her mother died. So she was raised by her father all by himself. But that's not quite right, because she had a grandmother who was living in Providence, Rhode Island, who was widowed. That's where her father had originally come from. The Fletcher family was from Providence. And so when grandmother realized there was a need, she said, "I'm coming to Brookline, and I do not think your home is satisfactory, so we will buy another property, and I will make it what it ought to be for a home for our granddaughter." So, so she did, and she did a beautiful job raising Nina. But when Nina was 12 years old, her father went off to Europe and came home a married man. And this was just devastating to Nina, because it had just been the two of them, you know, all these years. And so that was an unhappy moment in her life. But the marriage was very short-lived, because the stepmother happened to be at a party on a yacht in the Atlantic Ocean off of Cape Cod when there was an electrical or an engine explosion that killed everybody on board and sank the yacht. And so once again, it was Nina and Daddy, which I think satisfied her quite well. Well, eventually, she went off to, well, actually, she stayed in Brookline to go to finishing school. It was a boarding school. It's called Miss May's, and it still exists today. It's no longer a finishing school. It's a prep school. She did not go to college. She did not earn any degrees. However, she became quite a noted scholar and an expert in early American antiquities. She wrote 6 books. She wrote 150 magazine articles during her lifetime, and to this day is the most published of any contributor to Antiques magazine in its history. She also wrote a number of museum catalogs and was well respected in the community of American antiquities. She won not only the Cronin Shield Award, but the coveted Francis DuPont Award from Winterthur. So it's very rare that anyone would win both of those awards. Even to win one of them is just remarkable, but to win both of them is unheard of. So how did she get to that point? Well, when she was a young woman, in 1925, she married a man by the name of Bertram Kimball Little. He was from a very prominent family in Salem, Massachusetts, and he had gone to Harvard. He had gone to Harvard Divinity School and then on to Union Theological Seminary, and he was well prepared to become an Episcopal priest. However, he met Nina. Nina had grown up as a Unitarian, and this was not going to work for a career in the Episcopal Church. And so instead of continuing on with that pursuit, Mr. Little did not leave the church, but he did leave the ministry and became interested in the publishing business and in owning a rare bookstore. So he ran this rare bookstore and married Nina, and they decided, they started out with just a little apartment in Cambridge. And then from there, they decided they would buy a little summer cottage in Marlborough, Massachusetts. And it was near a first cousin of Bertram's, a man by the name of Amos Little, who was married to a woman whose name was Edna Hilbrun. Well, Edna was just absolutely enamored with the early American way of life. And she would go around and she would pick up things off the side of the road. Oh, she might find something wonderful, like a spider pot, you know, one of those pots that you cook on an open fire with long legs. Oh, she'd pick up that, and she just built an amazing, amazing collection of useful things from early America. And she couldn't talk enough about it. And she eventually amassed such a collection that she was able to donate 2,000 objects to the brand new Smithsonian American History Museum in Pittsburgh, which is really remarkable. And these are wonderful, wonderful objects. Well, when she became friends with Nina, she told her, she said, "Now, Nina, if you don't collect something, you won't have a thing to talk about." And so she produced a list of books. It was very popular to collect transferware at that time, you know, the blue Staffordshire china. Well, that was a very popular collectible. So she had put a list together and gave it to Mrs. Little, and she said, "Now you go and get these books and become an expert. And once you're an expert, then you can become a collector." And so she did. She went right to the Cambridge Library and she checked out all of these books and she studied them and she learned as much as she could about transferware china. And one day, it was a beautiful weekend in Massachusetts, and Mr. Little decided it would be fun to go on a road trip. Well, this was in 1928. So they got in the car and they drove up to the North Shore and they went to a little town called Ipswich. And Ipswich happens to have the largest number of 16th and 17th and 18th century houses still standing. And so they decided they would wander around there, and they decided to go into an antique shop. So they walked in this little antique shop, and Mrs. Little looked around, and there on the back wall was this Staffordshire china. So, you know, the characteristic blue and white. So she walked over to it and she took a close look at it. And there on the china was a depiction of Niagara Falls. Well, this was amazing because it meant that it was English china made specifically for export, and here it was right here for the taking. And so she decided, well, she just had to have it. So she picked it up and she took it over to the checkout counter. This was a young couple. Nobody had inherited anything yet, and there wasn't a big bank balance to draw from. And this bowl was $17.50. Well, in this day and time, that doesn't sound like an awful lot of money. But today, it would be close to $500. So the Littles decided, well, the bowl was worth it. Mr. Little wanted to do anything he could to make little Nina happy. And so he bought the bowl. Now, they had to figure out for the next month or so how they were going to eat. But they did, and that was the beginning of a tremendous career in collecting and the study of early Americana. Mrs. Little went on to join the Wedgwood Club, and from there the China Students Club, and through that organization she began to meet other people who were interested in collecting. And one of the people that she met was a woman by the name of Lyra Watkins. And if you look at the sheet that I gave you, she's right over here. She was a wonderful scholar herself, writing books on glass and on pottery, redware pottery from New England in particular, and wrote the authoritative book on redware in New England called New England Potters and Their Wares. That book is still the authoritative information on redware china in New England, or redware pottery. No one has ever written anything that could even eclipse it. So unfortunately, today it is out of print. It's still available. You can go online and look for it. I found a copy for $100 yesterday. But I'm not going to purchase it. It's nice to go and find it in the library, however. She and Nina became close friends, although she was a half a generation older than Nina, just like Edna Little was as well. They were both older. And so she encouraged Nina in collecting redware rather than just collecting the chinaware. And this is an example of redware right here. This is a slipware plate. It says, "Forgive all injuries." So, but anyway, that began that collecting venue. Well, she went on from there. She became interested in primitive portraiture. That was an especial interest of hers, and she began buying these primitive portraits. You could get them really for a nickel and a dime. People did not appreciate them at that time. And she wanted to know who did them and where they came from and about the lives of these artists. And so she would collect and she would write down everything that she could find out about the painting, who the painting was, who had been depicted, and just everything that she could find about all these different artists. And she just became a remarkable resource for identifying and authenticating these primitive portraits and landscapes and other seascapes, all these different unknown artists that had been around in the earlier centuries in America. So there was one artist in particular that she completely discovered, and he had created this wood carving. This is the coat of arms of George III. And he, the man who made it was a man by the name of Winthrop Chandler. And he was known for his fancy painting. Now, we have some fancy painting right here in this house. The fireplace that's marbled, well, that was a very popular technique that has been used in America since the 18th century. And that's what Winthrop Chandler did. And he was an 18th century artist, creating this coat of arms for his first cousin. And at one time it was painted. Now that paint has all worn off. But it is an absolutely exquisite carving. Well, Winthrop Chandler had gone on to Worcester, Massachusetts. He was originally from Connecticut, but went to Worcester, Massachusetts, and did fancy painting. And he did beautiful overmantels. But he also did portraiture and landscapes. And Mrs. Little was busy amassing everything that she could find that belonged to, or was attributed to, or could be attributed to Winthrop Chandler. And then she began to write books about him and all these wonderful things. And when Mrs. Little died, she had been collecting for 2 separate households. And all of the things that she collected, she used. They weren't just, set aside for, oh, you can't sit on that. No, you could sit on every chair. You could use every dish. They used their things. They didn't just look at them. And so in her house in Brookline, she had a lovely overmantel that she had purchased for $500. Now, an overmantel is just a painted panel that's above a fireplace. She purchased this for $500 from its original location when the house was going to be torn down. And when it sold at auction, it went for $600,000. was one of the most valuable objects in her entire collection. Now, why did it go for that much money at auction? It was because of the connection with Mrs. Little, because she had discovered this artist and she had made him known. Well, she went on, I told you about the 6 books that she wrote. This was the last one that she wrote. The first one that really put her name on the Hall of Fame was this one about decorative wall painting. And it talks a lot about faux finishes and murals and the different artists who were doing them, and certainly Winthrop Chandler is included in this book. Well, that's what really put her name on the map, particularly the reprinting of it, which occurred in the 1970s. And that occurred because of this man, Cyril Nelson, that's pictured here on the front. He decided that this book should be reprinted. There was a new surge of interest in early American wall painting, and more people were beginning to collect them. Because of the bicentennial, there was this new interest, and so he wanted to play on that and reprinted that book. Well, from that came American Country Arts, which was primarily taken from magazine and newspaper articles that she had written, that she just reworked and rewrote to include in that book. And then he convinced her that she should write about her entire collecting career. So she wrote little by little, 6 decades of American decorative art, collecting 6 decades of American art. So this one is really wonderful, and it really is a must-have for anyone who wants to study American social history or American art and artifacts. It's really quite wonderful. I included also on the little card here a picture of Abbott Lowell Cummings. Now, the reason I did that is because he was a good friend of the Littles, both Mr. and Mrs. Little. Mr. Little eventually was asked by William Sumner Appleton to become the director of Historic New England, what we know of as Historic New England today. It was the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities. And through that organization, they knew Abbott Lowell Cummings, who was an architectural historian. And the reason I wanted to mention him is because he brought dendrochronology to the United States. It began as a study back in Great Britain, and he had heard about it and learned about it and decided that this house, Cogswell Grant, which was their summer home, should be tested. And so he brought them over. They could only do hardwood, they couldn't do pine. Pine is a very new topic of dendrochronology research, so it's quite wonderful. But that's why we're able to do that, because of him. So anyway, so that's Nina Fletcher Little.